Robyne.
Hello, Peter Katz.
Our listeners can't see this right now, but you're wearing a Nirvana t-shirt. You're looking very rock and roll today. So I guess those watching on YouTube will log in just to see your amazing Nirvana shirt.
Aw, thank you. I actually recently, Hunter actually said to me, he said, like, Mom, when did you get a t-shirt game? I didn't know you had a t-shirt game. And I'm like, I didn't even know t-shirt games was a thing. But apparently some of these original shirts are coming back, and lots of the teenagers are trying to find them and acquire them. And I'm just like, oh, do I ever have a treasure trove if you are ready, young one? So
if you have an original Joy Division t-shirt, the classic, then you're really cool.
I love it.
Yeah, it's funny for me to see the t-shirts that were kind of the t-shirts in the 90s, and then you go into Urban Outfitters or something like that, and all of a sudden these t-shirts are back. Well, yeah. I've always appreciated, you're Robyne, you're this brilliant scholar and author and speaker, and you do all these things, but you always like have a little bit of rock and roll. Like when you're on stage, you've got your your blazer, but then you've got like your Jordans on or something. Yeah. you've got a little something to kind of say, hey, I'm cool too, or I don't take myself too seriously here. Like, is that intentional that you do that?
Oh, what a great question, Peter. And it is intentional in the sense of it's important to me to always have like something around me and my person that just like really deeply like grounds me in my identity of like my most authentic self. So yes, I can dress up for large engagements and do that, but doing it with me wearing a pair of Jordans or Air Force Ones just brings like, but this is still Robyne doing these grown-up type things. So it's kind of a way of just really kind of being myself. And again, how I think a lot of folks use, whether it's clothing choices or different things, to kind of be as a form of expression. So that way we recognize ourselves when we're in different situations.
I love that. Yeah, I wear, if you look at any photos of me performing, I'm wearing the exact same thing every single time. Every now and then, like every 6 months, I might change up the shirt I'm wearing underneath. Truth be told, because it's gotten so stinky that I just like can't wash the stink out of it. But it's like jean jacket, like I just got this outfit, specific pair of pants. And I just find like when I put that on, I'm there to do a really specific thing. And it is sort of like wrapping myself in a little bit of a sense of home, a little bit of sense of like, okay, I know what I'm doing in this mode. And what I also like about it is I don't have to think about it, right? It's like, imagine every time I had a big talk or performance that I spent so much energy thinking about outfits. Like I've just, over the weekend, I was at the Juno Awards, and my partner Tess was nominated for her 8th Juno Award. Wow. They've won twice. They didn't win this go round, but she's still a winner in my eyes. But just thinking about how much energy we spent trying to figure out like what to wear, different day, different parties. I'm like, oh my gosh, imagine having to do that all the time. So hot tip from me is have your go-to wardrobe for certain moments that you just literally don't think about, and make a bit of a ritual around putting it on, right? Like I never show up at the venue wearing that. I show up like I'm often wearing black, and that's like I'm a tech right now. I'm setting up the gear. I'm not Peter Katz the performer, and then there's a moment where I change into it and I'm like, okay, I'm crossing this threshold into I'm about to go perform.
Do you know, I think we talk about that in psychology as almost these cognitive shortcuts, right? So what we're doing is, again, you've already addressed it in what you just shared there about like, gosh, can you imagine if every single time we had to like try to come up with, okay, what's it going to take to be able to prepare myself for this role or this responsibility that I need to do now? And you had to like reinvent that every time versus you having that ritual that's familiar. So it's almost like muscle memory, emotional memory takes over. And as soon as you slide on that jean jacket, it's like, okay, I know what my job is in this moment. Yeah. Yeah, those
Love
cognitive
that.
shortcuts are really helpful. I also find, it's interesting. I'm sure other folks might relate to this too, is I'll go to certain like restaurants or, different food chains, and I usually always order the same thing. And I've actually done it so often, Peter, where sometimes I try to like, no, I should try something different. I need to like stretch my comfort zone. And then maybe I'll order something different or a different drink. And then I have a moment with, I should have just stuck with what works for me. And because I'll miss the fact that I'm in that place, but I'm not having the thing that I have come to expect with that place. So I think some of us who have these patterns or routines, it just strengthens our understanding of we know who we are and we know who we are not, and embracing who we are unapologetically sometimes in those situations actually can serve us really well.
I appreciate that, Robin. I'm trying to say, listening back to some of our episodes, I realize I say the words, I love that after everything that you say. So if we end up coming up with some in-time swag and merch, we'll just put a t-shirt and it just says, I love that. So instead I just said, I appreciate that, which is, I have my thesaurus just off screen here so I can come up with it.
It's funny, Peter, that you recognize that pattern in your speech, because I recognize that, my goodness, can I string together a run-on sentence? I'm pretty confident that I could use "and" like at least 8 times to keep a sentence going live, going strong. So that was one of the things that I noticed when I heard some of our earlier podcasts, is my capacity to create run-on sentences is remarkable.
It's a vulnerable thing, putting yourself out there, right? I know we've talked about this a little bit in the past. We talked about it the day that the podcast was launched, and
Yes.
and you kind of have to like face yourself. And I mean, I know I've been sort of in that mode my whole life, right? I put these albums out, and the truth is, by the time it's wrapped in cellophane, like I don't like it anymore, or I just want to go back and change things. I think I did mention this in a past episode, but I always try to kind of frame that feeling that I have of embarrassment, or like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I sounded like that, or said that, or messed up that, or this, that, or the other. That like the only reason that I have the privilege of feeling embarrassed right now, or whatever that is because I put myself out there.
Yes.
And the fact that I'm now looking at it and looking at it through that critical lens. Obviously, there's the part of the critical lens that we want to just park at the door and say, thank you very much, I'm not going to be debilitated by you. And there's also the opportunity to learn from it and be like, okay, because I've put that out there, I'm now realizing that I do this thing, that thing, or the other thing.
Yes.
And now I'm going to be able to improve and do it better next time. So
Peter,
just goes with the territory of putting things out there, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And the day that we actually talked about that, afterwards, I actually sat with it for a wee while after we finished our time together, because I noticed that I was like really curious about like, yes, we were putting this thing out there, and the fact that we were doing it together for me actually made it easier, because I knew that, for example, if something wasn't well received, I knew you and I would be able to work through that together. So like being able to have an ally in a creative project's really special. And the other part I noticed, I kept on in my mind as I was like unpacking it, Peter, I kept on noticing that I was using this word like them and they. And what are they going to say? Or what are, how is that going to impact them? And I actually paused and asked myself, like, okay, who is actually they? Who is them? And I realized that them and they that I was like imagining in my head, they actually weren't people that, like, they didn't have faces. It was just this almost like this just, oh, what are they going to say? And it's like, okay, well, when I started to challenge that, I realized, okay, well, they aren't actually part of my life. They aren't part of my inner circle or my community. And it just really almost felt like the sense of like release, where I don't have to try and appease theys, because a lot of time those theys, like they're not even out there. And it reminded me, in psychology, we call it this, it's actually considered like a cognitive distortion, which is called the imaginary audience. And what was interesting, when people wrote like decades ago about imaginary audiences, that was before like social media. That was before we actually did have audiences and people were following us and looking at information. And what was interesting is that if that goes unchecked, sometimes our perception of the imaginary audience can actually like preclude us from doing things because we're worried about what they're going to say or do or judge. And I just had that moment where I realized it's like, wow, here I am back in this kind of practice of an imaginary audience. And really, I want to position myself, and I hope this helps other people perhaps think of it too, as like, we want to make sure that like, obviously our home team is okay with what we're doing and are on board, but these like faceless theys, I don't think we need to let them preclude us from our dreams or doing service.
I'm pretty sure that they is at Honey Badger 2022, who likes to comment on my videos.
Yes.
So,
I like that. Yeah.
oh yes, great point, Robin, and very true. That that I think part of the the way that I've found and engaging with social media or those kind of things is to making sure that I'm sort of contributing to it versus just consuming it. And yet that's where the risk lies, right? It's like the quote that Brene Brown always references about, being in the ring. Is that who's the president that she's referencing
Theodore
there?
Roosevelt, man
Theodore
in the
Roosevelt,
arena.
yes, yeah.
Yeah, man in the arena.
Man in the arena, right? And so, like, we want to be in the arena because that's the place where we grow and we learn and we actually become the better artist or the better writer or the better speaker or the better teacher or the better physician or whatever it is that we're doing. The better parent is by like taking those risks. And yet, what you're describing is some of the reasons that might keep us from doing that. Is that's also where the risk is, and that's where the vulnerability is, and that's where the criticism lies. And yet, probably most of that criticism is just this work of fiction that we're creating in our minds. So I appreciate that very much. Also, Honey Badger 2022, if you're listening, there is no Honey Badger 2022, but I hope that somebody listening to this creates a fan account for Honey Badger 2022, and I can't wait to see what you berate me with. So,
oh, Peter, can I add one point, not to your Honey
please.
Badger comment, but to the other comment? I also I feel this is really helpful to kind of understand our reactions to when perhaps like we hear negativity. Now, I think so often, and I can remember, for example, early on in my teaching career when I was at the university teaching, I remember I get these like course evaluations from students. And, let's say, 229 people said it was a great class. And one person said, meh, not a great class, didn't love it. And I remember there was not a single time that I went home like basking in like 229 positive evaluations, which was pretty remarkable. I would go home focused on that one sole negative appraisal of the work. And I remember wanting to like find the person, like not in like a dangerous, like Liam Neeson Taken way, but I wanted to find them in that way of saying like, what could I have done better? Like, how could I have brought you into this? Because I wanted to do right by you. And I remember always feeling like something was like wrong with me because intellectually, obviously I know I can't have everyone love every class or every piece of whatever we're creating. I know that intellectually, but when my heart felt and saw like one form of criticism or rejection, like that's what I got fixated on. And what was really helpful for me to like unlearn some of that focus on the negative was to recognize from an evolutionary perspective, we are like conditioned to pay attention to negative things more than we are conditioned to pay attention to positive things because positive things are dangerous and they threaten, negative things are dangerous and they threaten our safety. Positive just feels good. So when I remembered and got back to that understanding that we're drawn to the negative as a survival strategy, and it's like millions of years old, it actually helped me like meet that part of myself with more compassion when I recognized like, oh, from an evolutionary perspective, this was actually really good and it served my ancestors well. So instead of being mad at myself that I couldn't like appreciate all the good and got distracted by that one negative thing, recognizing that's actually how our brains work. And then I could show up differently for how I was talking to myself about what that was feeling like in my body.
I love that. Trademark.
Trademark. Peter Katz, 2023.
So question though, so like what does that actually look like in the moment? So Robyne is, Robyne or listener kind of gets the negative review out of many positive ones, or gets gets that kind of feedback. When you say that you kind of reminded yourself of this science and neuroscience and how we're wired, like what does that look like? Is that like a flash of a moment where you just pause and you remember that? Is it like, what would that process, how would that play out for you?
Yeah. So I wish I could say I'm that mindful and present. I'm not.
Right.
What would happen is probably later in the day, I would notice that I was feeling something that was heavy, or feeling something that was uncomfortable. And the strategy that I've learned is we use this kind of like 4-part strategy around this, is first to like name it, right? Like, what are you actually feeling? So perhaps later or after that, I would notice it's like, whoa, like I'm feeling actually hurt, or I'm feeling rejection. And one of the things, Peter, we know about working through emotion is we need specificity about what we're actually feeling versus like upset, because like we don't like, what does that even mean? Or for example, when people say I'm tired, it's like, what does that even mean? Like, are you depleted? Are you feeling low energy? Because with more clarity, we can then match intervention or support in a way that will actually help us feel better sooner and quicker. So we name it, right? So, hey, I notice I'm feeling rejection, or I notice I'm feeling like sadness. And then we want to like have like a kind of this idea called place it. Okay, so we named it, and then we place it. Where do you think this might be coming from? And we just get curious, not judgmental, right? Like curious, be like, okay, well, what would have made me feel today rejected, or made me feel hurt, or feel even just a sense of, threat? And then I'd be like, okay, well, likely it was that teaching evaluation. Okay, so then I'm going to action it. I get to then decide, okay, how do I want to meet these feelings? And we're going to action it in a way where I might then walk through that recap about physiologically it makes sense as to why, and that's okay. Or the other thing that we sometimes do is we look at it and be like, okay, so let's just like sit beside it, right? Let's just invite it to the table versus telling ourselves not to feel that way. And what I've learned and how I've supported other people with this is when we make our awareness more of an ally to our emotions than a manager of our emotions, it actually can alleviate some of that heaviness in a way that's a bit more effective than a lot of the strategies we often use.
I love that. Now I'm just going to laugh every time I say I love that. So it was name it, place it, action it, and then what's the fourth one?
I'm forgive me. I'm actually forgetting. I think it's the third one. I'm forgetting one. So, Peter, reflect on that for a second, and I'm going to do a very quick search right now because I'm trying to remember my own work. How sad is this? It's my own work, and I'm trying to find it.
Seinfeld has a great bit about like going to the doctors, and it's like you sit in the doctor's office and you tell the doctor, like, because doctors always have all those books, right?
Yes.
And then so you say and the doctor's like, oh, I'm just going to go into my office here, and then he's like, what the hell was that? He's like, or he or she is like looking it up in their book right now. So I love that you're looking up in your own book the answer to this.
Oh, and I literally just read this morning as I was recording this audiobook, Peter. So, okay, we're going to see it. We're going to recognize that we're feeling something. Okay. Then we're going to name it. Then we're going to place it, and then we action it. So, sorry, the first one was we have to recognize it, that we're actually feeling something. So I'd recognize I'm upset, and then I name it, and then I'm going to place it, do my best to try and place it, and then I'm going to action it.
I love that.
There you go.
And I actually appreciate the reminder about that manager voice that you had talked about, and that part of ourself. You know, we had talked about that in a previous episode, and it's that part of ourself that maybe is a little more forceful, right, in its communication. And I just appreciate the reminder that manager wants the same thing that we want too, which is for us to be safe. And so I appreciate you framing the manager voice as an ally, and how can we kind of be beside it versus subordinate to it, as maybe it would like us to be. How can we kind of be next to it? So appreciate that.
Peter, you're very, very welcome. And I was super excited today, Peter, if it's okay to switch gears just briefly.
Yeah, please.
I had a question that I wanted to ask you. And so in some of our episodes, we get to questions to ask one another. But
Yeah.
I actually asked this question last night to my students at Trent University. I was teaching my second year students, and we were doing a value exercise. And there were two questions. Actually, there was a series of questions I asked my students, but there was two that I actually in the moment did a mental Post-it note where I said, next podcast, I want to ask these two questions of Peter. So is that okay that we could do some of our time for me to ask you these questions?
Robyne, as you know, this is unscripted. So absolutely. Let me check the script. Yep.
Yeah.
Robyne asked Peter two questions. Here we
Okay,
go. We're good.
perfect. Okay. Well, the first question I want to ask you, and again, I always encourage the listeners to ask, I'll be asking you this as well. So I ask
Right.
Peter, but this is for you as well. Peter, what compliment is your favorite to receive?
Oh, wow. That's a great one. I think my favorite compliment to receive, let me really presence that. I mean, I've always liked people sort of finding me ingenious. So it's not just smart, but it's like the way that you solve that, the creativity you applied to it, the thoughtfulness, the newness or whatever. I love that compliment. I think I've always sort of hungered to be recognized just as a great artist. I've always been a bit dismissive of myself, and literally when I was in theater school, one of the most kind of traumatic things that was said to me was in my first year of university. You kind of go before the panel of the faculty, right, after your first semester, and they're all sitting there, and you kind of walk in, and they're sort of letting you know the lay of the land and how you've done. And they said to me, here's what you need to know, Peter. They said, you're an intellectual surrounded by artists, and you need to be more of an artist. And it broke my heart because I wanted to be an artist. And if I'm really vulnerable, I've always kind of felt like I've kind of been getting away with this art thing because I kind of have a ingenious brain, and I can sort of solve the riddle and be like, okay, this is how you write a song, or this is. But I've always seen myself as other, as I'm not actually an artist. Even this weekend, I was at the Juno Awards surrounded by artists, and I kind of always see myself as okay, those people are real artists, and I'm kind of this guy who's kind of faking it or something. And so I think as I answer that question, I also long to just be seen as a great artist, that I've made something, and whether you know anything about me, or whether I've been charming, or whether I've shared some long story before or whatever, just the art itself speaks to you and moves you. That would be a great compliment that is a great compliment to receive. I do receive that compliment sometimes. So there you go.
Peter, I really appreciate that answer. I hear it. I also think so many people can relate to feeling that idea of just slightly in the fray, of so many different things. And, it's like you're in the middle of it, and it's just like, but you're not quite enough of it to
Yeah.
fully be part of it. Yet in other groups, people would look at you and say, like, of course you're an artist, Peter. Like, from
Mm.
an outside looking in, it's like, of course you're this creator, so talented and gifted and skilled. Yet when you're in that group, there's almost as much like variance within the group versus outside of the group. Because and again, I just think so many people feel that they don't quite fit in different places in their own lives, yet it's so ingrained and enmeshed in their identity. So I just really appreciate you holding space that, like, even the artist might not feel like an artist sometimes, or even the scientist might not feel like, yeah, me compared to other scientists, like, oh my goodness, like, yeah, I just happen to have some science degrees, but I'm not a physics person, right? So
Yeah.
again, even within community, I think a lot of us are really trying to find that sense of belonging and that feeling of enough of to be included.
What's interesting to me too, Robin, as I'm kind of present to the feeling right now with you, and thank you for that reflection, is I'm actually, as I'm thinking about that feeling, it feels old to me. It feels a bit stale. It feels a bit like not as true as it once did. And I'm just noticing that literally as I'm speaking to you right now. I'm like, oh, that's kind of an old way of thinking about it for me, and
Yeah.
it's kind of a bit past its expiry date, and it
I
doesn't
love that.
it doesn't actually sting or burn or hurt as much as it once did. And so that it's kind of interesting for me to notice that.
Peter, that's powerful. That's so powerful. And again, that discovery, and I'm just, gosh, thank you for sharing that with us, because again, we will carry old narratives again long after their expiration date because they're just familiar. So thank you for sharing just that, like that transparency of the fact that, hey, that actually feels a wee bit stagnant. That feels a wee bit old. That's so cool. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Can I ask you the
Thanks.
next question? Question two of the
Absolutely.
list, because this one was okay.
Absolutely.
Peter, what is one thing about you that may not be well received by others, but you would never change about yourself? So I'll say it again. What is one thing about you that may not be well received by others, but you'll never change it?
Yeah, what a great question. The thing that comes to
Thanks.
mind to me is I have a certain bar when it comes to the professionalism or that with which I want to present myself, but professionalism almost feels like that word is not capturing, like, for me, I have a duty. If someone has come into the room to receive a keynote or a concert or whatever that might be, I have a duty to make sure that I'm doing everything in my power that I know to do to create the optimal experience and impact for them. And so there are sometimes situations, I could tell you a longer story that kind of changed my life and sort of launched my whole speaking career. Probably don't have time for that whole story right now, but I could give you like a quick example
Sure.
right now, which is I was at a conference recently, and it was like a Thursday, Friday, Saturday conference. And on the Thursday night, they did an opening session. They had one speaker on the Thursday night, and then the Friday I was actually the MC for the all day on Friday. And on the Thursday, I'm sitting in the room, and a brilliant speakers on stage, but there's just something that's not working. Like there's just not a special feeling. There's not like a sense of cohesion in the audience. We're not sort of hanging on her every word, despite being a brilliant speaker. And I immediately knew that it was the lighting. I'm looking around, and it's like we're in a gymnasium right now. Like we're in this ballroom, and all the fluorescent lights are on. And I was like, this is a problem. And I had my sound check afterwards for the next morning. And so I said, hey, can we work on the lighting? and they're like, oh, well, like, it's the hotel controls the lighting. We're just kind of the in-house
Yeah.
tech crew. Like we're just the outside tech crew here. We can't really do anything about it. And at the risk of annoying,
Hmm.
tech crews, and as we know, we want to be very kind to our
Yes.
our hardworking tech crews, and we always want to, be allies with them. At the risk of that, I didn't back down, and
Hmm.
I said, how can we work together here to solve this? And I approached it with a lot of kindness. I
Yeah.
didn't sort of pull a diva card, but I basically was like, we need to fix this, and so, despite maybe a little bit of initial resistance, we went in, we figured out, we found that there was like beautiful wall sconces that we could light up. We got all the lighting off. We had to get the hotel manager in, and like
Yeah.
it took some work and some doing. But sure enough, the next morning, everybody walked in and they were like, "Oh, like what's
Yeah.
happening here?" And we were able to create a specialness, and so for me, I'm if I know better about, and not better than somebody else, but
No.
if I have that intuition and that knowledge that this needs to be fixed, I will not back down from fixing that, because I feel responsible to the audience, to their experience, and I want to make sure that I'm doing everything in my power to deliver the best experience for them.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And what I love, I'm going to say I love it, like you say you love it, that I love that this part of who you are is like there's this like sense of like confidence around it, that even though
Mm,
you recognize it could, brush people the wrong way potentially, the fact that like it's aligned with your values, it's aligned with how you want to be in the world and how you want to be of service, so you can get behind yourself in that case. And what I also love is your training and your skills and your background from musical theater recognizes the power of space and lighting and how it creates the environment to make what we're trying to do achievable. So I love
mm.
that as a speaker, you're then bringing in expertise from other of your, other chapters in your life, Peter. And that helps, I think, really build that place of speaking from confidence of this is important to me and this is something that I'm going to stand behind, which I think is really, really remarkable.
Thanks, Robin. It's always that battle between wanting to be agreeable,
Yeah.
but then wanting to deliver. But I think it comes down to, Brene Brown's distinction between being nice and being kind, right? Being
Yes.
nice is sort of plastering that smile on your face, but you're secretly resentful.
Mhm.
Whereas kind is you actually have a boundary and you stand up for yourself, but in a generous way. So,
Yeah.
um,
I love that.
well, I know we're over time here,
Yeah.
Robin, but I'd love to. Those are such great questions. Do you think I could flip them back to you, or would you rather answer them in a longer form way?
Oh, that's I can answer them quite briefly because I was working, as I said, with this
Okay.
curriculum yesterday. So in terms of my favorite compliment to receive, it's for me, it's very much it's like there's two. One of them is when people tell me that the children are good people. So when
Mm,
people let me know that like I've raised good humans,
yeah.
I love that. And it's not that like, hey, they're the smartest in the classroom or they have the highest grades. Like it has nothing to do with external achievement. It's literally like, my gosh, your kids are good humans. That to
Mm,
me just like sets my soul ablaze. And so I appreciate that compliment. And I think the second compliment outside of my role as a mother that means so much to me is when people let me know that I make them feel safe.
mm,
And when people say, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just shared all that with you, or I'm surprised I don't usually do this, to me, that's this idea that I've somehow made someone feel safe to share some of the weight of the world that they're trying to carry. And that's really all I want to do is I just want to be of service and help walk alongside people who are going through the hard parts. So those are my two answers on that one, Peter. And the part of myself that I have that isn't always well received, but I'm not going to change. This is new for me. Is recognizing like the components of my ADHD and what my ADHD looks like to the world. I
mm,
apologized for it for so long. And now, like embracing my full kind of symptomology of ADHD, it has created this like healing between all the parts of myself where I'm going to keep asking for what I need in certain spaces and places. And I'll give you one really quick example. I was doing a virtual event, and the person said to me, can you please just moderate your own questions that come in during the Q&A? And I actually said, is there someone on your team potentially that could support that by simply just asking me the questions out loud? Because I said, it's very hard for me to, part of how my ADHD manifests, it's hard for me to know what's the most important part of something. So I would read all of the comments and I wouldn't necessarily recognize what the immediate question is if I don't have time to think about it.
Right.
And doing it on the spot, Peter, in front of thousands of people just makes it really challenging for me to do that. So I asked the person and they said, oh no, you'll be fine. And usually, similar to what you described in terms of not wanting to be perceived as difficult, I would have usually just said, oh, okay, that's fine, and stumbled my way through it with a lot of uncomfortableness. Whereas now I say, actually, because of my learning disabilities, I do need support there. And if there isn't someone on your team, I'm happy to bring someone who could moderate for us. Yeah. And again, the first time I said that, it actually felt like this little part of me was like applauding on the inside, right? This little part of my heart was like, finally, thank you, Robyne. Like, we've needed that for a long time. So that's one part of myself that might not always be well received, but I'm embracing those parts in a new way.
Wow, what great answers. And I'm proud of you too, Robyne. And I'm also struck by what great questions these are. And like, as your friend, thinking of like, okay, if I want to give Robyne a compliment, I have some clues now, right? And think about if couples or friendships or parents, siblings, whatever, could ask each other these questions. It's like a little how-to manual on how to love each other and how to love me. I think that's a beautiful gift. So thank you for bringing those questions, and hopefully all of you listening might take those questions to the dinner table or wherever you might take them, to the car trip, and see what emerges. Well, Robyne, always a pleasure being with you. Thanks to all of you listening, and looking forward to doing another episode soon.
Wonderful. Take good care, everyone. Bye for now.